At that period of my life, I was living in an old house being built just after the war. It was particularly notable for the fact that it had been built by German prisoners, and this was a few years after the end of hostilities. This house was small in size, with only 2 entrances and only 3 floors. Its entire construction was the epitome of conscientiousness, and had it not been for the indifference of the communal workers, it would have continued in excellent condition to this day. There is also a basement in our house, which is a real sophistication, especially from a modern perspective. Within this subterranean space, of which I shall speak more fully hereafter, each of the 18 flats possesses its own separate room. Our basement had the unpleasant feature of periodically turning into a kind of swamp, becoming a mire that emitted such disgusting odors that it was unbearable to even walk past it, let alone try to enter it. Utility workers regularly attempted to remedy the problem, and as a result, the odors occasionally disappeared. Curiously, however, when asked about this by the residents of the house, none of them had ever seen these very utility workers. Nevertheless, the work was being done. Another unique feature of our basement was the presence of 19 rooms in it, not including the corridor. It was a mystery why the German builders added 1 more extra room, depriving 2 neighboring rooms of space. The door to this extra room, it should be said, was strong. Iron, 2 fingers thick, covered with rust in places, it slammed with force, creating sounds that caused shivers. This strange behavior of the door made it difficult to explain. After all, how could there be such a strong draft in an insulated room to move such a massive door as if it were light plywood? Several times, the neighbors set out to find out where such a force was coming from, but the enthusiasm vanished as soon as anyone approached that door. Perhaps it was that awful smell. There was a strange odor wafting from room 19, like some sort of putrefaction. Apparently, the sewage problem in this room was not the responsibility of the Housing and Utilities Department. Or perhaps it was the door itself that was to be avoided. It was unusual. On the corners and in the center of the door were metal rivets, shaped like circles and painted white. Time should have washed away the paint, but it looked like someone was constantly renewing it. There was another reason why the occupants avoided going out to explore. An oppressive sense of dread enveloped a man like a dark shadow. If he took a few steps beyond the threshold of room 19, fear literally paralyzed him. The notion that the door behind his back might slam shut with a loud sound, closing forever, depriving him of his freedom, became so real that no one dared to undertake the ordeal. Thus, we circumvented this ominous room, endeavoring to stay away from it. There was also a staff alkie living in our house, whom everyone called Uncle Joe. He was a good-natured man, but after a drink, he would sometimes get the urge to do something. At one of those times, Uncle Joe decided to put a big barn lock on the door to make sure no one could get in. He even got a welding machine somewhere to reinforce the massive hinges of the door. This task was done exceptionally well. However, he did not have the keys to the lock, but the residents turned a blind eye to that, as no one wanted to deal with what was behind that door. The residents breathed a sigh of relief. It was now possible to go down into the basement without fear. I decided to do the same on one winter Friday evening to enjoy a jar of pickled tomatoes. Having opened the door to the cellar, I began to descend the stairs, having previously switched on the light in the corridor. The flickering bulb threatened to leave me in the dark after a few minutes. Gritting my teeth, I hurried towards my basement. As I passed Dr. 19, I heard something incomprehensible in the distance, as if someone was moving something heavy outside the house. The sound stopped after a moment, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Continuing on my way, I came to my basement. Opening the cellar door with my key, I began searching through the jars, hoping to find something edible. Absorbed in this search, I became disconnected from reality, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that I came back to reality, having never found a single can of tomatoes. I decided to get cucumbers instead. As I was about to leave, I turned around, but then I heard some rustling. No, they weren't just rustles. They were muffled thumps, like something heavy was moving. It was as if the creature had encountered an invisible obstacle that hadn't been there before, and now it was looking for a way to overcome it. I froze in place, holding the jar of pickles, trying not to even breathe. The pounding on the door became more insistent and more frightening. My resolve vanished, and I cursed myself for my slowness. I had to act at once. The first blow should have made me flee from this subterranean burial ground, where hidden what was now striving for freedom, apparently not for the first time. To the blows was added an ominous scraping sound. Something full of rage and desperation was clawing at the iron of the door with its claws. I hoped very much that it would hold, that Uncle Joe had done a good job. The thought finally occupied my mind. After all, if the creature got out, it would no doubt notice the light in the cellar and realize that someone was here. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Something made the creature retreat. Perhaps it realized the obstacle was too strong, or it decided to take a break. But I realized that I wasn't going to get a second chance. Slowly placing the jar on the shelf, I prepared myself to relive the worst moments of my life. Carefully stepping out into the corridor and closing the door behind me, I turned to face the exit. My basement was in the farthest corner of this underground space. To get back upstairs, I had to walk about 5 meters down the corridor, then turn the corner and walk another 20 meters or so to get to the vestibule and up the stairs. It was at this point that the mysterious extra basement was located. The light was faint, falling along the corridor. Several of the bulbs seemed to be burned out already, and the rest were flickering, as if ready to go out at any minute. I began to move cautiously, tiptoeing my way through the first 5 meters, and then stopped to pull myself together. My path further on led to a 20-meter section where the damned extra basement was located. I moved carefully, pressing myself against the wall to make the least amount of noise possible. The first few meters were fairly steady, and I even decided to pick up the pace. The 19th door was only a few meters away, but suddenly a new sound pierced the air, making my knees buckle, and I slid to the floor to keep from falling. It took a few seconds for me to come to my senses, and then, not even looking at the danger, I rushed forward, past that damn door. I rushed up the stairs, left the basement, went back to my flat, grabbed my phone, and went to a friend's house for the night. Now, as I re-examine that terrible moment, it's hard for me to say what frightened me more: the sound of the ground breaking, mixed with the thumping on the concrete, or the hideous hand that crawled out from under the door, covered in a green pus-like substance, with 6 fingers, from which long claws protruded like nails with stumpy caps. Several years passed. In our neighborhood, they decided to erect new buildings, as our house, which was practically in the center of the city, was sentenced to demolition. The residents were relocated to other places, but before the demolition could begin, it was necessary to inspect all the premises, including the basements, according to the norms. This was not an easy task. One had to head down into those dark and gloomy expanses. A group of 5 strong men recalled how long they had delayed the moment to enter the 19th basement. They argued that there was no one there and that there was no point in going there. But under pressure from their superiors, 2 of them were still forced to go into that cellar. Apart from stinking rot and some old junk and strange flesh like scraps, they found nothing. However, according to their stories, they did find a strange tunnel in the wall. There was a cold draft and an unpleasant smell of a burial ground. The tunnel went down at an angle, so they decided to fill it with a special mixture and close it permanently, explaining that it was a design error. Thus, the house was demolished, and the dark secrets of the cellar remained unsolved, covered by the sand of time and erased from the memory of the neighborhood residents.